Some of what arrived in Australian showrooms from Europe in the 1970s turned out to be a problem to own. 10 of the most regretted, counting from 10 to 1. The one at the very top had a Maserati engine, cost considerably more than a Kingswood, and ended up parked permanently in Australian driveways because no one in the country could repair it. That one is still ahead. Number 10. Morris Marina, 1972 to 1975. The Marina was assembled at British Leyland Australia's Zetland plant in Sydney, using locally produced 1.5 and 1.75-litre four-cylinders, and priced to compete against the Ford Cortina TD and the smaller Japanese alternatives. The case it was making looked competitive on paper. In ownership, it was less convincing. Buyers who put it directly alongside what Datsun and Toyota were offering at similar prices found the build quality gap significant, and that finding traveled efficiently, from driveway to driveway, from one conversation at the servo to the next. The Marina's specific problem wasn't that it was strange, it was that it was ordinary, competing in a market where ordinary had a higher standard than Zetland was meeting. Choosing a Marina over a 120Y or a Corolla at the same money was a decision that became increasingly difficult to defend as the ownership months accumulated. The next car was genuinely unusual, an engineering achievement with a failure that arrived later. Number 9. Fiat 128, 1970 to 1979. The Fiat 128 established the transverse front-wheel drive layout that virtually every modern small car still uses. Engine turned sideways over the front wheels, gearbox packaged alongside it with unequal length drive shafts, interior space freed accordingly. The architecture that remains standard 50 years later was settled here. Australian buyers who chose a 128 were purchasing something at the genuine leading edge of what small car engineering had produced. The other thing they were purchasing, though the specification sheet didn't address it, was a corrosion problem. The 128's rust in Australian conditions arrived earlier and more thoroughly than buyers expected, and the gap between the car's engineering reputation and its bodywork condition gave ownership a specific character. The progressive deterioration of a car that had started as a genuine advance became the thing most owners remembered most clearly. The next car had no engineering distinction to compensate for what it was doing wrong, just the wrong concept, in the wrong market. Number 8. Volkswagen 412. 1972 to 1974. Volkswagen had built the Beetle because a small, light car with an air-cooled flat four behind the rear axle was a coherent idea. The 412 took that same architecture and placed it in a full-size family sedan body. A proper 5-seat car, full-size by Australian market standards, with the engine behind the rear axle and the weight distribution that followed from it. The combination of rear engine handling in a large family body, across the distances and road surfaces that Australian ownership required, was not what Volkswagen's experience had been preparing the brand for. The 412's buyers expected Volkswagen's reliability reputation to transfer to a car that was fundamentally different from the product that reputation had been built on. It transferred imperfectly. The next car had a more specific problem. It was built for a gap in the market that didn't quite exist. Number 7. Chrysler Centura, 1975 to 1978. Tonsley Park in Adelaide had been building Valiant since the early 1960s. In 1975, it produced something quite different, the Centura, a mid-size rear-wheel drive car based on Chrysler's French Simca operation. The car was Chrysler Australia's attempt to fight the medium-sized Cortinas and Tiranas. What it found in Australian showrooms was a confused identity. While a 2.0-litre four-cylinder was offered, Tonsley Park engineers famously crammed the massive 245 Hemi 6 into the lightweight French body. Valiant buyers wanted that power, but the heavy engine gave the Centura terrifyingly nose-heavy handling. When Chrysler's Australian operations passed to Mitsubishi in 1980, the Centura was a discontinued model, with French components in a parts network that had moved on from it entirely. Owners still driving one after that point were managing a very specific kind of problem. The next car was built around anticipated legislation that never arrived, and the body shape that resulted was its permanent record. Number 6. Triumph TR7, 1975 to 1981. Triumph's engineers designed the TR7 with a fixed-head coupe body because U.S. federal safety regulators were understood to be considering legislation that would ban open-top cars. The fixed roof was a direct response to that anticipated regulatory environment. The legislation was proposed, discussed, and never implemented. Triumph had built a sports car shaped primarily by a rule that didn't become law, then released the TR7 convertible, in 1979, giving fixed-head owners a clear view of the decision the car had been designed around. The body choice was one part of it. British Leyland's build quality through the mid-1970s delivered the rest. Australian buyers received a sports car carrying the Triumph name and the specific character of British Leyland manufacturing in its most difficult years, at a price the Triumph heritage was being asked to justify. The next car had nothing regulatory at the root of its failure, just chemistry, working steadily against Italian steel. We are halfway through. From here, the cars on this list are more expensive, more ambitious, and more comprehensively difficult to own in Australian conditions. The one at number 1 paid prestige money for a French engineering achievement with a Maserati engine and hydro-pneumatic suspension, and found both unsupportable in this country from 1975 onward. Still ahead. Number 5. Alfa Romeo Alfasud, 1974 to 1979. The Alphasud drove with a quality that buyers who tested it and compared it with everything else at the price described with some insistence. The flat-4 engine low in the nose, the front-wheel drive giving the car a balance a rear-drive alternative couldn't match, the steering communicating the road in real time. There was nothing in the segment that replicated it. What the test drive didn't communicate was the corrosion. The Alphasud's rust has been widely attributed to steel quality in production, specifically metal susceptible to oxidizing from within the body structure before the surface gave any clear indication of what was happening underneath. Owners who chose the car in 1975 on the strength of a test drive the competition couldn't match were completing that purchase without information that 3 years of ownership would supply in considerable detail. The conversation between the driving experience and the ownership experience was the Alphasud's specific story, and there was no easy way to reconcile the two. The next car had no such compensation, just an engine consuming itself while the instruments showed nothing wrong. Number 4. NSU Ro 80, 1970 to 1977. The Ro 80 came to Australia in small imported numbers. A twin-rotor Wankel engine, front-wheel drive, a semi-automatic transmission, and an aerodynamic body, a decade ahead of mainstream thinking on what a family car should be. The engineering ambition behind it was genuine and well-directed in most respects. The Wankel's problem was the apex seals, small components at the tips of each rotor that maintained the compression chambers and wore at a rate no buyer of a sophisticated prestige car had reason to anticipate. Complete engine rebuilds became necessary at low mileage. NSU provided replacement engines under goodwill arrangements for some affected owners in Europe. In Australia, the support structure for that kind of response was modest, and the car's mechanical complexity placed it well outside the experience of most local workshops. Owners who found themselves in the rebuild conversation were managing it at a distance from the manufacturer that made the conversation considerably more expensive. The next car's failure arrived more visibly, from the outside in. Number 3. Lancia Beta, 1974 to 1979. The Lancia Beta's corrosion in the United Kingdom became serious enough that the Office of Fair Trading conducted a formal investigation. Lancia withdrew from the UK market as a result. The Australian situation was comparable in character, if not in regulatory response. Cars purchased as prestige Italian products, twin-cam engines, stylish bodies, the Lancia name, were presenting structural rust within 1 or 2 years of ownership, advancing from within the body shell before the external paint gave the full picture. The Beta's failure was disproportionate to its purchase position. A buyer selecting a Lancia in 1975 was making a deliberate decision about what the badge represented. What the car was doing to itself in the meantime was not part of that representation. By the time the extent of it was visible, the appropriate moment for a conversation with the seller had long passed. The car just ahead paid more, expected more, and discovered its failure in a different and more complete way. Number 2. Rover SD1, 1977 to 1982. The SD1 won the European Car of the Year award for 1977. The fastback body was designed at Rover's Solihull studios with a visual confidence that drew genuine comparison to Italian coach building. The 3.5-litre aluminium V8 was an engine Rover had refined from a General Motors unit it purchased the rights to in the 1960s. The marketing positioned the SD1 as the restoration of British prestige motoring to genuine competition with BMW and Mercedes-Benz at the executive level. Australian buyers who paid that price and opened the door found panel gaps, electrical systems, and early corrosion arriving ahead of what the European Car of the Year title had implied they were entitled to expect. Supporting an SD1 in 1970s Australia, in terms of parts, specialists, and the knowledge required when something failed, was an experience proportional to British Leyland's contracting presence in this country. The next car assembled a version of that same problem with more sophistication and fewer solutions available anywhere in the vicinity. Number 1. Citroen SM, 1971 to 1975. Citroen produced the SM using a V6 engine, developed in collaboration with Maserati. Combined with the hydropneumatic suspension system, Citroen had been refining since the DS. The SM was imported to Australia in small numbers as a left-hand drive car, with a handful converted to right-hand drive by independent local engineering firms, and priced well above the domestic alternatives. It was the most technically ambitious car available to the Australian buyer of that period, a French Grand Touring car with Italian engine engineering and self-leveling hydraulic suspension that behaved unlike anything else on Australian roads. In 1975, Citroen entered financial difficulty and could no longer support its stake in Maserati. Maserati entered receivership. The official supply of SM engine components, already a specialist item in Australia, became essentially inaccessible through any reliable channel. The hydropneumatic system required tools, mineral hydraulic fluid, and workshop knowledge that were available in France and available in Australia with increasing difficulty. Owners of SMs in the late 1970s had sophisticated and expensive cars sitting in driveways, while the ownership situation was evaluated by a workshop that had not encountered this specific combination of French hydraulics and Italian V6 before, and was not confident it could address it. The embarrassment was proportional to the ambition of the original purchase. A buyer who had paid for the most refined European motoring available in this country had, by 1977 or 1978, a car that was a permanent fixture of the driveway and a conversation topic of a specific and uncomfortable kind. The neighbors drew accurate conclusions. So did anyone who watched the same car parked unmoved across 3 seasons. These 10 were bought by people making choices with the information available at the time. The Marina buyer was comparing prices honestly, the Alphasud buyer drove it, and nothing else at the price came close. The SM buyer was making a genuine case for European sophistication, and was right about the car, and wrong about the country's ability to support it. Some of these decisions were reasonable, given what was known in the showroom. The things that made them regrettable arrived later. Is there a 1970s car from Europe or elsewhere that gave you, or someone you knew, the specific experience of regretting the showroom? Tell me in the comments. I read everyone, and if Australian motoring history is what brought you here, a like and a subscribe to Sunburnt Chrome keeps it coming.